adversity to be great. Say hello to my wife. I'm having what's known as a wardrobe malfunction. She is cutting my hair. This has been a dream of hers.
You've endeared me to your millions of viewers.
To humiliate me on the air.
I always cry even though it isn't allowed. So proud.
You make me want to be a better streamer.
A better streamer.
No, definitely not that. Do you need adversity to be great?
Your skill is you tee up your guests and you make them look, so good.
Yeah. Oh, such a good question. Gets me all fired up, man. Such a good interviewer. I'm ready to go. Jump through the screen. But no, so true.
They can't see I'm dancing by myself.
And despite the best ministrations of your wife, you still look ugly.
Well, hello, everybody. How are you guys doing today? It is Thursday. I think it's Thursday. Let me check. Yep, it's Thursday, October 15th. We are halfway through the month. We are basically 2 weeks away from the election in the United States, or as I like to call it, Armageddon. Let's hope not. There's always truth in jest, but I really hope that was just a joke. We're going to have a great show today. Bob is here. He said, looking for the nuggets from this episode. Here we go. We are going to have so many nuggets because, I'll talk about him in a moment, but I've got Dave Patnaik, he's the CEO of Jump Associates. He's on the board of Conscious Capitalism. Maybe I'll explain the 6 degrees of Tom Morris, of how I got to him. But I'm just glad that I did get to him, and it's going to be a great show. Today is Breast Health Day. It is National Breast Health Day. It's important. It's always been important to think about, breast cancer research, cancer research in general, but even more so lately because I saw this article actually just a couple days ago. In fact, I'm looking at the date. Where is the date? The date is somewhere on that article. But it actually said that COVID-19 has actually led to dangerous delays in cancer diagnoses. A lot of people have not been getting the scans, or in this case, mammograms, that they've needed to because of fear, at least initially. And so if ever we've wanted to and needed to have a real handle on making sure that we are mentally healthy, physically healthy, now is the time. Well, just a quick recap. We've been having just an absolute blast with our partnership with ANA and their Masters of Marketing Conference. Tomorrow, interview number 8, which will be Procter & Gamble's Global Chief Marketing Officer, Mark Pritchard. And it's just been an amazing, in fact, I'll reference it in the Soliloquy Today series of nuggets and insights. But today we are focusing on Dave Patnaik. In addition to being the CEO of Jump Associates, in addition to being on the board of directors for Conscious Capitalism, he's the author of Wired to Care and an adjunct professor at Stanford University. I've only been able to jog around the Stanford campus without security coming to pick me up. So maybe this is the closest I'll ever get to going to Stanford. Also, just a quick mention, for those of you that know me for a fair amount of time, you'd know that I'm a monthly guest. I'm a guest on the Beancast, which is self-described as the greatest marketing podcast anywhere. And I think that might actually be true. This past week, I was on with Jason Lonsdale, Tamara Pruitt, and Lisa Laporte. And it was just a great discussion. One of them was quite a controversial one, or a meaty one, certainly, discussing the Wells Fargo CEO who was complaining that there isn't enough diverse talent, African-American talent out there from a recruitment standpoint. And you can be sure that I did not agree with that statement. So if you want to listen to me on the Beancast, all you got to do is just search for the Beancast, wherever podcasts are sold or given away for free. Most of them are given away for free. So let's do birthdays quickly. Happy birthday to some people that I haven't seen in a while, like Jan Wozniak, but also to Alison Gruder, to Johnny Tates, Mike Lieb, and then, of course, on LinkedIn, there's Peter Loix, there's Lee Mattis, Joshua Levi, Mark Thomas. Happy birthday to all of you, wherever you are. But now it's time to get to the seated soliloquy. And the seated soliloquy today is called, it's almost camouflaged, it is called Playbook. Before I do that, hello to Tom Morris. He's putting down his guitar to listen to this. You might want to be picking up the drums, putting down the guitar and picking up the drums. And I'll explain to you why in just a brief moment. But as I said, today's soliloquy is really called Playbook. You know, over the course of the past couple of weeks, as I've mentioned earlier today, I've had the pleasure of interviewing 7 upcoming speakers at ANA's Masters of Marketing Conference. Tomorrow, as I mentioned again, that I have P&G's Mark Pritchard, and then we wrap up the series next week with General Motors' Deborah Wall. The great thing of being able to do this as a host, or if you are a regular member of our audience or wonderful Zoom after-show community, is that you get to identify common or recurring themes, even red threads, as Tamsin Webster might refer to it. For example, conscious capitalism, or as I would refer to it, the evolution of capitalism, which itself folds into one of the 4 growth pillars that I identified in Built to Suck, namely corporate citizenship. You also get to recognize insights, real insights, not fake ones, as Dean Aragorn provoked yesterday, that are completely unique and different. They cut through the clutter like a hot knife through butter. They stand out from the crowd like a sore thumb. And that brings me to the third benefit, with a hat tip to Silly Sayings Day that we celebrated earlier this week. You get to reframe, connect the dots, and make new connections in the process. So today, I'll use these 3 skills to ask you this question. How does a company prepare and plan for a pandemic? The answer is contained in a single letter. And if you think that that letter is an alliterative P, as in playbook, well, you'd be half right. Actually, the letter that I'm looking for is S, as in playbooks, plural. It was my guest earlier this week, Planet Fitness CMO Jeremy Tucker, who mentioned that they created a 1,000-page playbook in next to no time to tackle the trifecta of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. It's how they came up with social fitnessing as an approach to reopening their gym safely. Playbooks are nothing new to us. We understand the concept pretty well thanks to major league sports like football. There are multiple plays that are used for a variety of scenarios within a game, governed by a fixed set of rules. But when these rules are thrown out the window and an entirely new game is being played, well, that is when you need a new and therefore multiple playbooks in order to become a key to staying in the game, aka survival, and hopefully winning it, aka thrival or growth. And growth is something that my guest knows a lot about because it's something that his company specializes in. I'm talking, of course, about Dave Patnaik. Now, Dave is the CEO of Jump Associates. He's also a senior advisor to many executives across industries, helping them create and implement strategies for what's next. Dave is a frequent keynote speaker at major forums, and his writing has appeared in Business Week, Forbes, Fast Company, and many, many others. He's the author of the book Wired to Care, named one of the best books of the year by both Fast Company and Business Week. Malcolm Gladwell called Wired to Care just what we need for the lean years ahead. We're not a jump. Dave is an adjunct professor at Stanford University, where he teaches a course called Need Finding, and I have to ask him about that. In the class, students draw upon methods from anthropology, design, and business strategy to discover insights about people and create new products and services. So I'm really excited to welcome him on. Welcome to the show, Dave.
Thank you so much for having me, Joeseph. It's great to be here.
So now, you know, this is your title, right? Dave Patnaik, but it is pronounced. So I've now phonetically written it out, just in case I struggle to remember it. Dave Patnaik.
That'll work. Maybe I need to respell my name, I think.
I think LinkedIn actually has a function where you can phonetically sound out your name. You can actually dictate it, and then you can click on a little button. But I'm pretty sure I'm just going to call you Dave for the rest of the show.
That sounds great.
So, you know, one of the things that I've had the pleasure of doing here is getting to know, and we were discussing this earlier, in some cases it's old friends, reconnecting with them. In other cases, it's new friends. And I loved how you set it up. You said, if we are to have a long-term relationship and friendship, it might be a good idea to tell you how to spell or pronounce my name. Well, I do hope that we have a long-term association, because I love what you're doing. But part of this getting to know one another is to find out some fun facts. And your fun fact is just a very simple one, which is you love to play the drums. So I have to ask you about when did you discover your love for drums? It seems like something that maybe one would do to release all of their stress and tension. So tell me a little bit about that.
That's quite an amazing photo you've got. My head photoshopped onto whoever.
What? It's not photoshopped at all. It's
tremendous
from the
amount of
archives.
and symbols there. It's not just I like drums a lot, but this also says that I like a lot of drums, which is great. I love it. No,
Quality and quantity.
You know, there are, but isn't that true, Joseph? There are so many things in life that nowadays you think that, okay, well, if you're going to enjoy it, you have to be great at it, right? You can't just paint for the love of painting. You have to be showing in a gallery or something, and it doesn't count otherwise. And so I have to say, with drums, I'm not a great drummer. I've been playing for a long, long time. I've been playing since 6th grade, and I'm meh. But Joseph, I just love it so much, and I feel like we have ruined hobbies in our society by making them other forms of achievement. And I don't need to achieve with drums. Just when I play the drums, part of my brain shuts off, and I get into flow state with it. So to me, the definition of a good hobby is something that you suck at, but you love doing anyway.
Oh, I love that. I mean, and you know, it's funny because yesterday we had Shell's Dean Aragon, and he basically said you can't be world class at anything if you don't love it.
Yeah.
But I think what you're saying is not incongruous in any way, is you can actually love something and you don't have to be world class if that's not the goal. But love is still important, whether you suck at it or whether you are world class at it. And I think that's a beautiful common thread.
I think Dean is completely right in what he said. You know, that Thomas Edison said that genius is, 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. And I think he got it wrong. I think it's 1% inspiration, but it's 49% perspiration, and it's 50% fascination. You have to love it to get the inspiration, and you have to love it to put in the work to get the perspiration, right? And if you forget about the fascination part, that's where things run aground. And I think right now during COVID, for a lot of people, the fascination is what's getting strained out. So hats off to your program to try and kind of reinforce that fascination and bring it back again.
I have to tell you, I've never been very good at math, so I added those 3 things up, and it came to 112%.
I may have done that wrong.
No, I'm kidding. But I'm pretty sure but I love that. It's a beautiful spin, on this idea. And of course, it applies a third dimension, right? So anytime we apply an extra dimension, it just makes it richer. Stephen Rubin is here and is watching. Jan says, to your own drummer makes perfect sense. And Tom said, I immensely enjoy being a poor to mediocre rock guitarist. Yeah. Dave is right, and he just might be. So he really is looking for a drummer right now. So maybe if you're trying to get together a little virtual group, why not? Why not? And I think, having a hobby, of course, is important now. I certainly hope that Corona TV is not just a hobby, but I know that I'm having fun. I know I love it, and I hope I don't suck at it, but we'll see. We'll see. Now, listen, you came up with a quote earlier, Thomas Edison quote. I love playing the quote game with my guests the other day, I got so excited, my guest, I think it was Brad Jakeman, ex-PepsiCo, that I forgot to bring up his quote. So I'm going to ask you to identify 2 quotes today. One has absolutely nothing to do with our conversation, but it's a really good one. So would you like to play with me?
Okay, let's do this. Here we go.
All right. So it's just a beautiful one. And this was also in reference to Brad's, he is on the board of the Humane Society. And we were talking about this insight, which is if you take care of animals and you really, have care towards them, then by definition, you should have care and take care of humans as well. So this is the quote: "All beings tremble before violence, all fear death, all love life. See yourself in others, then whom can you hurt? What harm can you do?"
I mean, that's an amazing quote. And I think the way that one should play this game is that if you don't know, you should say Winston Churchill, and 90% of the time you'll be right. But this has more heart to it than anything Churchill ever said, right? And this has more empathy than anything Churchill ever said, which makes me move more to my parents' homeland in the Indian subcontinent. I want to go to, Gandhi or Mother Teresa.
Well, it's actually, funnily enough, an American from the Midwest by the name of Bud H. Ha. And I'm just kidding. It's Buddha. But we're going to have a little bit of no. But you are absolutely right. But I do have a real quote for you, which will come a little bit later. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about, because we just got a comment. Jan asked, "What fascinates you about Jump?"
Yeah.
So let's start off by talking about your capacity as the CEO of this company. It's a company that's about innovation and growth. So what fascinates you about Jump, and specifically the fields of growth and Jump and innovation, and in particular, during the age of COVID?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Jump is a strategy and innovation firm, which means we're a consulting company. There is nothing intrinsically interesting about that. I don't know that people wake up and when they're little kids and say, "I want to grow up and be a consulting firm." And so the what of what we do is minorly interesting. The why of why we do it is what matters, right? And it is that greater sense of purpose. When we talk to companies about what Jump does, and I really get into explaining what we do, I often say that Jump has more in common with Starbucks or Whole Foods Market than it does with McKinsey or Bain. And what I mean by that is that more than a consulting firm, Jump is a purpose-driven company. It's a company that's really driven by a cause that we believe is greater than ourselves. And Jump's purpose is to transform lives through learning and growth, right? And that's what we spend our time on. And we do it through the vehicle of strategy and innovation consulting. But really, if you look at all these amazing companies that we work with, whether it's Samsung or FedEx or Starbucks or Target, I mean, these are all amazing companies. These are companies that are really, really good at doing things. But these are also organizations that sometimes struggle when it's not about doing things, it's about learning things, right? And that's what we can help folks to do. And so our purpose is really about both helping organizations to learn and then helping those organizations to grow, which means you need to help the individuals within those organizations to learn themselves. And you need to help those individuals to grow as people, right? To have a bigger view on the world than maybe they had 5 or 10 years earlier. So the thing that I love most about Jump is our purpose, which is to transform lives through learning and growth.
So I have a feeling we are going to become long-term friends because we share this tremendous vision and passion for growth. I call it the prime directive, and that's why even in the soliloquy, the idea of from survival to thrival, I believe we're all in the survival business today, but survival doesn't have to be a bad thing. Survival doesn't have to be about, I don't want to die. Survival can be, our time is limited. mortality, accept our mortality as individuals and corporations or even brands, and make the most of the time that we have and leave a legacy. So that's how I define survival. But thrival is growth, or in many cases, a return to growth. And that brings up your real quote today, which is, growth is never by mere chance. It is the result of forces working together.
Mm.
And this is not Buddha. It is not Winston Churchill. It is not Gandhi. It is not Mother Teresa.
Yeah, it is the result of forces working together. That's such a beautiful quote, because I think that's completely true.
You can take a guess, or I can tell you.
Well, yeah. How about you give me a hint?
Well, I would say the first is he founded this company, and it is probably a company right now that could use growth and use the result of forces working together. And
I mean, this sounds like the kind of thing Jeff would say at Amazon. Jeff Bezos, would be my guess.
Well, he definitely is on the, I would say his forces are working together, but actually it's James Cash Penney, also known as J.C. Penney. You know what I thought about, Dave, with this quote, which is, if it's true that growth is the result of forces working together, then therefore the lack of growth, stagnation, or declining growth must be the result of forces not working together.
Certainly one factor to it. I mean, we live in a society that, for very reasonable reasons, has developed a strain of thinking, which is, let's call it anti-growth, right? And that's part of the whole anti-capitalism thing. And we can, there are very good reasons why many people in our society are saying that capitalism is in its late stages, that it's done and we should get over it. And the last 20 years have many examples as to why they might be right. But as a devout capitalist, right, in my philosophy, I am pro-growth. But growth does not mean fattening, right? Just enriching yourself with more money. Growth has a more profound point of view. And to your point, Joeseph, of what you said before, all living things are growing things. It's when you stop growing that you're on the other side of the curve and you're deteriorating. We think of growth in economic terms as domination or greed. And that is certainly one flavor of it. And it's not one that really fires me up, but there's a different flavor of growth, which is about flourishing, right? Which is, about development, right? I'm a parent. I have a 13-year-old and a 10-year-old. And don't I want them to grow? I want them to grow in terms of growing up. And I want them to grow as in their bodies to grow and develop. But I also want them to grow as people, to take on a bigger perspective on the world, to care about things beyond themselves, to expand their sphere of concern. And by that definition, that's a different kind of growth than just dollars and cents.
Oh, it's completely true. And, we will talk about conscious capitalism. I love there was a word when I was looking at the document before, conscious capitalism movement. And I love the fact that this is a movement. Victor Hugo said there is nothing as powerful as an idea whose time has come. We're living in a time of movements, right? Whether it's Me Too, whether it's Black Lives Matter, whether it's conscious capitalism, these are all movements. And the other thing about the idea of being alive and growing is that when we stop moving, we also stop growing. Whether it's the shark, the hummingbird, all of these beautiful animal analogies as well to come full circle. But I completely agree with you. That's why I said I think we're going to become friends. One of the things is growing does not have to be, as I say, growing out. It can be growing up. Growing up means making tough choices, sacrifice, self-sacrifice, opportunity costs. it also gets into something else that I know we're going to chat about, which is the long game.
Mm-hmm.
You can never get to the long game if you're not planning, if you don't have that growth mindset that is more marathon than sprint, right?
Right. I think that's absolutely true. And that's an idea that is particularly challenged in the last 6 months as we become more and more present focused, as we just focus on the now, and not seeing how we ourselves are the beneficiaries of the long game.
I have some wonderful comments coming in, and we had some guesses of Virgin and Jeff Bezos. So at least Tom sides with you that it was a good guess. He also adds, amazing what you can learn, like cash is my middle name. Well, maybe it should have been, maybe it would have been leverage, or I don't know, or debt. Oh, well. Tom adds growth as human flourishing. Aristotelian. Is that right?
Yeah.
The richness of well-being. And, Stephen actually asks a really interesting question, which I think you will love, Dave. He said, I think it's a softball for you, but still, is a capitalist, in your opinion, synonymous with being a conservative?
Absolutely not. I'll tell you, that I grew up in a household of dyed-in-the-wool liberals. I have never voted for someone who wasn't a Democrat. Right. And I, even in years where it was not okay to be a liberal, I was proudly a liberal. I'll even say that to the point where when I was in college, I was borderline socialist, that maybe all of this capitalism stuff was for naught. And then after college, I went and I worked in India for about 5 years. And I came back from India a dyed-in-the-wool capitalist. Right. And the reason I became a capitalist is because I saw something happen on the streets of India. I went to India right around in the end of 1991. India went broke as a country. Right. Literally, the government was running out of cash. And this was because after 40 years of saying that it didn't need the rest of the world, they woke up to realize that the rest of the world didn't need it. And so India had to change, and she had to open up her borders. She had to open up her currency, and she had to, include in new forms of investment beyond just government ownership. When I went to India, there were just 3 different kinds of brands of cars you can buy, all large Indian, models that look like things out of the 1950s and 60s. And this was in the early 90s when I was there. And if you worked really, really hard and you did really, really well, you could buy either an Ambassador or a Maruti, right? Or I forget what a Premier, what they called a Fiat, right? You could buy one of those 3, and that was it. Right? And then the country began to open up, and what I saw was not just people making money. What I saw was people lifting themselves out of poverty. And it taught me that there's a difference between making money and creating wealth. Right? Do we have time for a quick story on that, Joeseph? If we can share it, because what I saw is that I was running a product development organization in an engineering company there, and we needed somebody who could make some models, like the kind of things that there's 10 million of them here in Silicon Valley. Like if you want to build a device, you want to create some wooden models or some clay models first just to see what it looks like. And there were no model makers when I went to India that we could get to. So we found a guy, and this fellow came from a village where he and his family had been carving Indian religious idols, like Hindu murtis, for generations. And so compared to those intricate sculptures, our rectangular little boxes were easy for him to do. And the first time he came to meet us, he had to take 2 buses, and then he had to walk the last half a mile. He had to walk the last kilometer just to get to our offices. Right? Within a year, he was coming on a motorcycle. Right? A year after that, I'm told he had a car, but I don't know, because he wasn't coming anymore. He was sending 2 of his guys, right? Because he had built up a whole organization. So it became so tangible to me that you can lift people up right? That you can create wealth, which is very different from the Lehman Brothers, making money stuff that caused the Great Recession, right? But that distinction turned me into a capitalist, so I am proudly a capitalist, and I am proudly a liberal.
It's brilliant because this idea of creating wealth versus making money. But who would have thunk that it would be a visit to India that you would almost think the opposite would have occurred. But what a beautiful story. And the ability to kind of recognize that it's, maybe that's the danger, right? Is that we fall into this idea that these choices are mutually exclusive, that they're ors versus ands.
Right. Now, does that mean I'm in favor of crony capitalism? No. Am I in favor of monopolies? No. Right? Am I in favor of what we're seeing in the Trump White House, where he's basically put the government up for sale? Absolutely not. Right? There is a strong role for the public sector to play as well. Right? But asking should we have a public sector or should we have a private sector is asking me to choose my right leg or my left. Can't I have both?
I hope you can. And I mean, in fact, you can. You should. And both your arms too, and your beautiful turtleneck as well. Very Steve Jobsian.
Yeah.
But yeah. So let's go back to that for a second, because even the concept of wealth has another dimension to it, because there's qualitative and quantitative. A lot of common themes, as I was discussing in the soliloquy, comes down to happiness. And so we've discussed it's interesting because we're discussing happiness and love and these things that are intangible and maybe even ephemeral, but then we're anchoring them in something that is quantifiable, and measured in dollars and cents. And I think part of the answer is, but they're not at odds with one another. They can peacefully and joyously coexist.
I think that's true, right? It's do you need oxygen or do you need food? Pick one, right? And the answer is no. We need a multiplicity of things in our system, right? Intrinsic joy is really important, and you can die poor and still be very joyful. I've seen people firsthand who are in that situation, right? Particularly in India or Joeseph, where you grew up in South Africa. We see that firsthand. But that doesn't mean that material wealth doesn't have a place to play either. I am very grateful that I won the birth lottery and was born in the United States of America, in an apex civilization of tremendous wealth. It also makes me shocked that people are so fearful here, given how much we have.
Well, I'm just hoping that I'm not deported, but I'm happy to be here as well for now. Although Canada is looking quite attractive, I might add.
Well, cross your fingers. We have a couple weeks. Maybe we can turn.
So I want to go there only because you opened the door from a permission standpoint, and just ask you a question, a marketing question, if I may.
Sure.
The Democrats, or at least Democratic candidates, some of them, maybe the radical left, have been accused of being the other S word. I'm not talking about the plural of playbooks, but the S word being socialist, which to me, in part, is as much a marketing and a positioning challenge as anything, right? Which is, if I call you a name, or if I label you, and I say it enough times to enough people, and enough people join in, and that becomes your label, right? As we say in marketing, perception is reality. Your insight today, your tremendous insight, is the two can coexist. To what degree do you, from what I said, would you agree that the danger is an incorrect labeling, because the definitions, I do not think, are, the practices are not necessarily socialist practices, or how does it exist in your conscious capitalism framework? What does the future look like? What should it look like?
Yeah, and I think, it's, I'm not a socialist, right? So I'm the wrong person to ask on how I would feel if I was being called a socialist beyond just, well, you misunderstand me. But the idea of being a socialist on the radical left, many of them are socialists. If you ask Bernie Sanders, he proudly will tell you that he's a socialist. And we got a chance to vote, as in the Democratic primaries. Did we think that the Democratic Party should be led by a socialist? And twice now, the Democratic Party said no. We're not about socialism, right? But that's not the underlying problem of it, right? Because when people you try to weaponize the word socialism. They say, like, you're a socialist. They don't mean you have a competing theory of the role of government, to play in the economic interests of a country a la Sweden. What they're really trying to say is you're not an American, right? And that is, so saying you're a socialist, right, has become a dog whistle for saying you're not an American. You have no place here. You're not one of us. And socialism has always been used as a weapon to otherize people in this country. I'm certainly not a capitalist. I'm the CEO of a company. I founded a firm. We work with Fortune 500 companies. I do believe that companies have a role to play in lifting up society as part, that is not just about maximizing shareholder value. At the same time, I'm not cool with branding people that they, just because we don't agree with their views, they can't be part of our country.
I really appreciate that answer, and I actually hadn't heard the connection, right, which is the dog whistle aspect to the term. But regardless,
and if the dog whistle's too subtle for you, don't worry. We have a president who will tell you straight out that you need to go back to the country you came from. Okay.
Which for me would be South Africa. But yes, Bob. We know Bob is a big Bernie fan. He's a democratic socialist.
Correct.
But and look, I mean, we'll leave this here and park it and move on. But I think a lot of the challenges come down to, what's in a name, right? What's in a word? What's in a phrase? And how they can be characterized and mischaracterized. But the reality is the evolution of capitalism, conscious capitalism, is a movement, is a time. I have been just, if I could tell you one thing that has made me the most hopeful and excited in 2020 and even 2019, it is just hearing, whether it's Philip Kotler, whether it's John Mackey, whether it's just the number of leaders that are all saying the same thing, the Business Roundtable. It's joyous. It's joyous to hear that we can figure out a better solution that doesn't have to sacrifice the ideals of one side or the other.
Right.
And that's exciting to me. Now, Dave, let's. I want to talk about a couple of other things, because your firm Jump has put together a whole process and a framework to help leaders basically plan for what happens, when the pandemic is over. And I know it's a common thread, which is, how do we avoid this knee-jerk, it's almost this double-edged sword, right? Which is, agility has been this byproduct of this time. But the danger, as you say, is that we become now even more short-term focus and reactionary. So I would love for you to talk a little bit about, what is this bigger vision? Is it conscious capitalism, or is it something else that you're helping leaders plan for now?
Well, a central part of being a conscious capitalist is to have a future focus, is to think long-term. And there are many companies who have done incredibly well in the last several months, because they've been all about agility, and they've been about quick decision-making and rapid response. And based on that, you could take away the conclusion that that's all we need. It's like, we don't need to have long-term thinking. We just need to respond quickly, and we'll do great. That's not actually what we're seeing. If you look at the organizations that have done really well through the pandemic, most of them are the beneficiaries of long-term decisions that they or their predecessors made several years ago, right? Best example, Chipotle, right? Chipotle is doing really good in this environment right now. Some of you will remember, like 4 or 5 years ago, Chipotle ran into huge trouble. They had an E. coli scare. Several people died. The food was poisoning people. The CEO got fired, and they had to completely retrain themselves. But in doing so, what did they do? At that point, they chose to upgrade their safety protocols. At that point, they put in better ventilation into their kitchens. At that point, they put in protocols like testing people's temperature when they come into work in the morning. So all of those long-term systems that Chipotle put in place several years ago set them up to succeed during the pandemic. Universal Music Group, another great example, and I love working with them as a company. This is, as we know, there's a large group of people who are musicians in hip hop and rock and roll who are African Americans. And so starting several years ago, Universal's been doing hard work around racial equity, not because they were reacting to a particular moment, but because they saw this as something that was strategically important to the company. So when all of this came to a forefront this summer with Black Lives Matter and George Floyd, Universal actually had initiatives in place for it, right? And finally, my dear friends at Target, who we worked with for several years, if you talk to Brian Cornell, the CEO, he says one of the biggest things that's helped Target to navigate these hard times over the last 7-8 months is the fact that Target spent time a few years back defining its purpose and values and articulating why it deserves to exist in the world. And that's served as a rallying cry through these tough times. So yes, rapid response, agility, that's really important. But the ones who are doing really well are also the beneficiaries of long-term thinking that happened over the last several years. And it begs the question, which is that, so what are the things that we ought to be doing right now that future us is going to look back in 3 to 5 years and say, oh, I'm so grateful we did that?
And what are they?
For every person, it's different, right? But for every person and for every company, it's different. But starting that process of saying, like, what are our strengths? How is the world changing? What do we need to do differently as a result? What are the kind of boring systems that we need to put in place, right, to set us up for long-term sustainable growth? With many of our clients now, Jump is spending a lot of time helping folks to plan out what does a post-pandemic world look like, right? And this is something that, on some level, we've gone from being a strategy and innovation firm to Jump has become the post-COVID company, right? Like the vast majority of what we're doing is helping leadership teams in large organizations to figure out when this thing is over, what's going to happen next, and how do we set ourselves up for success then?
I want to touch on something. First of all, I want to give you one more example, which I think would be a really good one, is Zoom. So one might look at Zoom and say, well, they just got lucky. One day, everything was going great, everything was good, and then one day a pandemic hit, and the next thing we know, their market cap is worth more than the world's 5 largest airlines combined.
Yeah.
But to your point, this was not just one day we went into the casino, we spun the roulette wheel and we got lucky. We put all of our, we put all our chips on black, or we put all of our chips on 0-0, right? This was the product of the fact that they were on the right track and all their planning paid off.
That's right. I mean, the quote game would be, whoever said luck favors the prepared mind. Right? And in our day jobs, luck favors the prepared company.
But by the way, Tom says, Dave gets me so excited about his business that I keep hearing Van Halen's Jump as his theme song, but don't ask me to play it. Maybe in the after show.
Eddie Van Halen passed away. God rest his soul.
So we pay tribute to Eddie Van Halen. I want to ask you just one little follow up there, which is, I'm buying what you're selling. You know, of course I agree with it. But are there any examples, and I'm just thinking out loud here, are there any examples of companies that maybe didn't have that long-term planning vision set up, that were able to really quickly pivot and take advantage, or at least survive and thrive during these pandemic times?
Yeah, no question, right? Some of this has to do with the sector that you're in and where you play, right? If you are in the hotel business, it doesn't matter how great a hotel you run, right? There are exogenous forces that are going to be in the way. You know, it's like you can have the most beautiful house on your block, but if you're in a bad neighborhood and the school system is horrible, then your housing price is going to be worse. And so where you play affects as much or more than how you play, right? And so there are essential retailers who maybe are not as well managed as a Target, who have received an uplift because we were all hoarding toilet paper, right? And they happen to have some, right? And that's not the benefit of a long-term vision, but it will help you in the short term. So, you know, there's again what is the other quote that, you know, even a broken watch is right twice a day,
Right?
and I'm sure there's plenty of examples of that. But over the long term, right? If you're actually going to work at a company for more than a couple of months, or own a stock for more than a couple of months, right? Or God forbid, you know, invest your kid's college fund, you know, in the wealth creation of the stock market. You want to look for people who are doing this again and again and again, and not just getting lucky. Some people do get lucky, and it's better to be lucky than good.
I wrote about what I call the coming corporate apocalypse, and don't say that 3 times fast, especially when you've been drinking. And as I wrote, every good apocalypse needs 4 horsemen. And the 4 horsemen for corporations are size, which is obviously, let's see how big we get before we suck. The second is age. The fourth is culture. But the third is being a public company. And that's where I spoke about short-termism, or short-termitis, which apparently is like a chronic rash. But I wonder what your thoughts are about to what degree this short-termitis or short-termism that is itself focused on quarterly earnings, that this corporate epidemic is a function of, it gets back to conscious capitalism, being a public company and having this obsession, this external obsession focused on short-term results. Yeah.
Well, I think it's true, but I don't know that it's just a product of the public markets. The public markets are a formalization of human instincts, right? I mean, we took how human beings think and we turned them into a bunch of rules because they seem reasonable to us, because that's how we think, right? And most human beings are present focused, right? And the neuroscience tells us this. People who've studied, you know, time outlooks, you know, tell us that about, 16% of human beings are future focused. They're the folks who are thinking of where is the world going in the future? What's going to happen down the road? Where will we be in a couple of years? And they're not focused on what's happening today. There's another 13, 14% of us who are past focused. Right? And the past focus folks define everything that's happening now in terms of what happened before. You can see the past focus people when you have an innovation conversation. They're the ones who say, Uber is just a blip. Taxi cabs are never going away. Hotels have been around for centuries. Why wouldn't they be around for centuries? They're past focused, right? Fortunately, there's a few more people who are future focused than past focused. But 70% of us, the vast majority of people, are present focused. They're focusing on the here and now. They're right where, they look at the world around them and they say, this is reality as it should be, right? These are the people who, when you show them that the world is changing, they say, yeah, you're right, the world is changing, but we need to focus on this quarter. right? We need to focus on right now. And it sounds unreasonable to just focus on this quarter, doesn't it? And it sounds reasonable to us because most of us, 70%, are present focused. Even when we're shown how that mindset is wrong. If you asked me back in February, right? If you asked February Dave, February Dave, what are the odds that in about 6 or 8 weeks, 4 billion people, a majority of the human species, are going to be under voluntary house arrest? I would say that there's no way. That's not going to happen, right? February Dave was present focused. He looked at his reality and he said, like, I cannot see beyond that. That's all it's going to be, right? Now you sit here in October, and it's like, October Dave, what are the odds that we're actually going to go through massive retransformation of this culture? We're going to do some significant restructuring. We're going to actually find ways to treat all of our people equitably, right? And we're going to get out of this nasty hole of just partisan, mutual assured destruction that we're in. And we're going to do it in 6 months. 6 months? That seems unlikely. But you just saw the idiot that February Dave was, that he couldn't imagine a different future, right? And we make that same mistake every time. We look around because most of us are present focused. We look and we say, like, whatever I got going on now will be forever, or at least for a very, very long time. And sometimes that's true, but a lot of times it's not.
I think I was trying to think of a good build on your beautiful past, present, future, and this is what I settled on. The future, the ones focused on the future, well, that's leapfrog, right? The present are the boiling frogs, and the past are frogs' legs. So that's how I kind of that's how I decided to frame it. But the reality is, in all seriousness, the present and the past are basically your boiling frogs.
Yeah.
Whether they're poo-pooing a trend or discounting it or just ignoring it or saying, yeah, it seems interesting, but I need to focus on these unread emails. But
I mean, the past folks, at least you can hopefully disprove them, right? Or the evidence is there. They are now frogs' legs. The present focused folks, it's a much more pernicious problem, right? Because number one, that's most of us, 70%.
Right.
Number two, they have accepted the premise that the world is changing. They are talking like the future-focused people and acting like the past-focused people. It's like they acknowledge the cliff and they're driving over it anyway.
I think they call those lemmings.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, Frog Philosophy by Joeseph Jaffe. But actually, I think Jan said something also very philosophical, which is ironic that future thinkers are more present, mindful, and in the moment.
Yeah.
It is true. It's a good way to think about it. So we've got about 5 or 6 minutes, and we'll continue this wonderful, wonderful conversation in the Zoom after show. Let me just put the URL on there for you, which is for those of you that want to join Dave and myself, bit.ly/CoronaTV after show. I'm going to just call out your fantastic LinkedIn article in a moment. But I have to ask you, what does November Dave have to say? Please, because that's another 4 weeks. Yeah. Where will we be in November, Dave?
That's a wonderful question. I try to, as a habit, not try to think about November Dave. I find I'm much happier, to quote your fellow Bud H. Ha, right? To just kind of free myself from expectations of what's going to happen in the future. I mean, I'm a strategy consultant that doesn't like to plan and doesn't like to envision future as much.
And you learned your lesson. You know, November Dave learned his lesson from February Dave. So
right. November Dave is hopefully going to accept it and see it come in and not freak out one way or another because his expectations are spoiled.
Well, fair enough. So we're gonna just touch on this wonderful article, and I'll share the URL as well. But you wrote Stories from Summer Camp: How Leaders Are Navigating the Pandemic, and I have all 5 of your points. But I'm going to just give you just a moment or two to talk a little bit about summer camp, the article, and pick one or two of the points, and just share maybe one or two of these insights. Or I can flash them on the screen randomly. But I thought it would be a nice way to I think it was a great way that you framed the whole discussion.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, and the background on this for folks is that every year Jump has done something called a Jump Offsite, where we invite leaders of strategy, innovation, and insights to come together. And we do it at a cool place like the Carneros Inn up in Napa. That just wasn't a possibility this year for obvious reasons, and so we did it instead as a series of once a week, Zoom experiences. But we needed to get out of Zoom fatigue, and so we framed it as a summer camp, and we framed it into what it looked like and what it felt like and the story of it. And it was probably the most fun Zoom call that any of us had ever been on. Was that weekly summer camp? We did it all through the month of August. It was a way for these leaders of insights, strategy, and innovation to just share news from the field about what's going on in the world. And the lessons were super clear, which was, yes, rapid response matters, and you need to, if anything, this is helping folks to make decisions more quickly and across their organization. And yes, long-term thinking and being future-focused matters, because seeing that folks are the beneficiaries of it. And also, and I think that you probably have seen this, and many of the folks who are watching this have seen this, which is that human beings are not built for this kind of virtual stuff. We are creatures of flesh and blood. And so the thing that's getting degraded more than anything is some sense of real trust, of real connection. And that would happen just by bumping into each other in the office. And so you really have to build that trust in kind of deliberate ways, picking up the phone and calling people and just saying, hey, how's it going, before you push hard to get the work done.
Well, I just want you to maybe touch on this one in particular, which really intrigued me. Don't push off crucial conversations until the end of the pandemic.
Yeah, such a great lesson, and several of our participants, shared this, which is that after spending time at summer camp together, they said, I realized there's something that I've been wanting to talk about with my team that I've just in the back of my mind, I've been thinking, no, we'll talk about that when we get back together in person. And I'm starting to realize that's not going to be next week, and it's not going to be next month. It might be a long time, and I need to have that conversation today. We had one of our campers talked about how he's on the board of a company, and he needed to really sit down and give some hard coaching to the CEO about kind of changing the way he does it. He said, but that's the kind of coaching that you usually give a CEO over dinner after you've had a glass of wine and you really kind of get it because you want to help him. He's like, and then I realized I'm not going to have a dinner with this guy for another year, right? And can we wait a year for this guy to re-steer or to change his thinking? Probably not. So you got to have those conversations now. It's hard, but you got to do it.
Well, what is hard for me is to have to say goodbye and end this. But before we do, I want to tell people a little bit about, I know two books that you recommend. One is yours, which is Wired to Care, and one clearly is Conscious Leadership, which talks about conscious capitalism. The Whole Foods founder, John Mackey, and also, of course, he sits on the board, as do you, of Conscious Capitalism. I also just want to give you an opportunity to just, leave us with a final thought or anything you want to promote. As you're doing that, I will flash a couple of ways that people can stay in contact with you and also become your long-term friends.
I appreciate that, Joeseph. Honestly, I could tell you that you should link with Jump on LinkedIn, and you should connect with Conscious Capitalism. But if there's one thing I'd ask you to promote is a little bit of self-care. Right? More than anything right now, do something for yourself that gives you a little bit of joy, separate from being a professional, separate from being a parent, separate from being a caregiver for others. Find a little bit of time for yourself. There's a reason why on a plane they say put your mask on first before assisting others. and the self-care is deteriorating for everyone. I know it's hard for you. It's hard for all of us, and it's going to be hard for a little while longer. Find those little moments, right? A little bit of self-care will go a long way.
Beautiful words to end the show. We are going to go and hang out just for a wee bit longer at the Zoom after show, bit.ly/CoronaTV after show. I'm also debuting today a new, I don't know what the word is, a call off or a sign off, almost like a tagline for Corona TV. So Dave, you're the first person and people watching it to actually hear it. Corona TV. Well, first of all, thank you for coming in. It's been an amazing opportunity to hear your wisdom. I do hope we stay in contact with one another. We'll continue to chat next door. But this has been Joeseph Jaffe. This has been Corona TV. And we remind you to think responsibly.
Thank you for watching Corona TV with your host, multiple author and global keynote speaker, Joeseph Jaffe. Corona TV is the show about hope, positivity, optimism, and if there's time left over, a little bit of marketing. If you like the show, tell a friend or two. Please subscribe to the show at CoronaTV.show. And if you want to get inside news, previews of upcoming guests, and much more, text Corona TV to 66866 or visit JosephJaffe.com/subscribe to sign up for the show's newsletter.
And despite the best ministrations of your wife, you still look ugly.